In the unforgiving deserts of Arizona Territory, 1880, where the blazing sun could kill a man as surely as any bullet, secrets buried in blood have a way of rising from the dust like vengeful spirits. Some debts can never be paid with gold or silver. They demand something far more precious. When a lone cowboy with haunted eyes rides into a frontier town, carrying the weight of an unspeakable past, he has no idea that the answer to his torment walks among the very people he's learned to fear. Her name is Anna, and she holds the key to a truth that will either set him free or destroy them both. What happens when the daughter of your greatest shame becomes your only hope for redemption? But before we begin, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're listening from. The dust cloud trailing behind Sam McKenna's horse stretched like a brown scar across the Arizona desert, marking his passage through a land that seemed determined to swallow him whole. The October sun beat down mercilessly, turning his leather vest into an oven and his throat into sandpaper. But Sam had grown accustomed to discomfort. It was his constant companion, along with the guilt that gnawed at his insides like a hungry wolf. 3 years. 3 years since that terrible night when everything changed, when he became something he never thought possible. 3 years of running from a debt that couldn't be settled with money, a debt written in blood and sealed with the screams of the innocent. As the town of Esperanza materialized through the heat haze, Sam's weathered hands tightened on the reins. The settlement was typical of the territory. Adobe buildings squatting like mushrooms in the desert, a main street wide enough for wagons to pass, and the ever-present threat of Apache raids keeping everyone's nerves on edge. The irony wasn't lost on him that he sought refuge in a place that feared the very people whose blood stained his hands. Sam guided his horse to the hitching post outside Murphy's saloon, the only establishment that looked like it might have decent whiskey. His boots hit the ground with a soft thud, stirring up more dust to coat his already grimy clothes. He was a tall man, lean from years of hard living, with steel-gray eyes that seemed to look through people rather than at them. A thick mustache hid the permanent frown that had etched itself into his features, and his dark hair showed premature streaks of silver at the temples. The saloon's batwing doors creaked as he pushed through, and conversation died like a snuff candle. Sam was used to this reaction. Strangers in small towns were always met with suspicion, especially when they carried themselves like men running from something. He approached the bar, spurs jingling softly against the warped wooden floor. "Whiskey," he said to the bartender, a portly man with suspicious eyes and nervous hands. "The good stuff, if you have it." "2 bits," the bartender replied, sliding a glass across the scarred wooden surface. The amber liquid caught the afternoon light streaming through dirty windows, and Sam downed it in one smooth motion. The burn was welcome. It was honest pain, unlike the poison eating away at his soul. "You passing through?" asked a voice from behind him. Sam turned to see a middle-aged man in a dust-covered suit, the kind worn by merchants or minor officials. His face was friendly enough, but his eyes held the wariness common to frontier dwellers. "Might be," Sam replied, refilling his glass. "Depends on whether this town has work for a man with my skills." "And what skills would those be?" "I can handle a gun, track anything with hooves or paws, and I'm not afraid of hard work." Sam's voice carried the weight of truth, though he left out the part about being very good at killing people who didn't deserve to die. The man nodded slowly. "Name's Tom Bradley. I run the general store here. We've been having trouble with raiders hitting the supply wagons coming up from Tucson. The territorial marshal can't spare any men, and the local ranchers are spread too thin protecting their own property." Sam's jaw tightened. "What kind of raiders?" "Apache mostly, though some say they're renegades working with white outlaws." Bradley's voice dropped to a whisper. "They hit the Peterson wagon train last month, killed 3 men, and made off with enough supplies to last them through winter." The whiskey turned to acid in Sam's stomach. Apache. Of course it would be Apache. It seemed the universe had a cruel sense of humor, always forcing him to confront the very thing he was trying to escape. "The job pays $50 a month, plus expenses," Bradley continued. "All we need is someone to ride with the wagons, maybe scout ahead for trouble. You interested?" Sam stared into his glass, watching the whiskey swirl like liquid guilt. $50 was good money, enough to keep him fed and sheltered while he figured out his next move. But taking a job that might put him in conflict with Apache felt like spitting on a grave he'd helped dig. "I'll think about it," he said finally. Bradley shrugged. "Fair enough. But don't think too long. The next supply run leaves day after tomorrow, and if we don't find someone soon, we'll have to cancel it. This town can't survive another winter without those supplies." As Bradley walked away, Sam ordered another whiskey and tried to ignore the conversations resuming around him. The locals were talking about the usual frontier concerns, cattle prices, weather, and the ever-present threat of Indian raids. But their words felt distant, muffled by the weight of his memories. He was 3 drinks deep when she walked in. The woman was clearly Apache, high cheekbones, dark skin burnished by the desert sun, and long black hair braided with small silver ornaments that caught the light. But she wore a simple blue dress in the white woman style, and her posture suggested someone comfortable moving between 2 worlds. She was perhaps 25 years old, with intelligent dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. The saloon fell silent again, but this time the tension was different. It wasn't the wariness shown to a dangerous stranger, but the careful respect given to someone who had earned their place through trial and hardship. "Evening, Anna," called the bartender, his voice notably warmer than it had been with Sam. "The usual." "Please, Mr. Murphy," she replied, her English accented but clear. "And perhaps some information. I'm looking for Dr. Harrison. Mrs. Valdez is having difficulties with her pregnancy. Doc's over at the Hendersons' place. Their boy broke his arm this afternoon." Murphy poured what looked like sarsaparilla into a clean glass, but he should be back within the hour. Anna nodded her thanks and moved to a small table near the window. As she passed Sam, their eyes met for just a moment, and he felt something twist in his chest. Not attraction, though she was undeniably beautiful, but recognition of a kindred spirit. Here was someone else who carried burdens that weren't entirely their own. Sam turned back to his drink, but he could feel her presence, like heat from a forge. Something about her was familiar, though he was certain they'd never met. Perhaps it was simply that she reminded him of people he'd known before everything went wrong, before he became the kind of man who jumped at shadows and slept with one eye open. The saloon's atmosphere gradually returned to normal, with Anna's presence apparently reassuring the locals rather than threatening them. Sam found himself stealing glances at her, trying to understand how an Apache woman had found acceptance in a town that lived in constant fear of her people. As the evening wore on, more details of her story emerged through overheard conversations. Anna was a healer, serving as both midwife and medical assistant to the town's doctor. She lived in a small house on the outskirts of Esperanza, straddling the line between the white and Apache worlds. Most importantly, she was trusted, a remarkable achievement in a time and place where such trust could mean the difference between life and death. When Doc Harrison finally arrived, a grizzled man in his 60s with kind eyes and gentle hands, Anna spoke with him briefly before both headed for the door. As they passed Sam's table, the doctor paused. "You're new here," he observed, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Anna tells me you have the look of a man carrying old wounds. If you need medical attention, my door is always open." Sam met the old man's gaze, then glanced at Anna, who was watching him with those intelligent dark eyes. For a moment, he felt an almost overwhelming urge to confess everything, to tell them about the blood on his hands and the nightmares that stole his sleep. Instead, he simply nodded. "Much obliged, document. I'll keep that in mind." After they left, Sam sat alone with his thoughts and his whiskey. The job offer hung over him like a storm cloud, and he knew he would have to make a decision soon. He could take the work and risk confronting his past, or he could move on and continue running from a debt that would follow him to the grave. As the night deepened and the saloon gradually emptied, Sam found himself thinking about Anna's eyes. There had been something there, not judgment or fear, but understanding. It was as if she could see the weight he carried and didn't find him wanting because of it. For the first time in 3 years, Sam McKenna felt something other than guilt and despair. It was a dangerous feeling, hope, but it warmed him more than the whiskey ever could. Tomorrow, he would have to decide whether to take Bradley's job. Tonight, he would allow himself to imagine that redemption might be possible, even for a man with blood on his hands. Sam woke before dawn in a cramped room above the saloon, his body drenched in sweat despite the cool desert morning. The nightmare had been particularly vivid this time, flames dancing against the night sky, the acrid smell of burning wood and flesh, and the sound of screaming that seemed to go on forever. But it was the child's eyes that haunted him most, wide with terror and confusion as life faded from them like water into sand. He sat on the edge of the narrow bed, head in his hands, trying to push the images away. 3 years, and the dreams never got easier. If anything, they seemed to grow more detailed with time, as if his memory was determined to preserve every horrific moment of that night. A knock at the door interrupted his brooding. "Mr. McKenna?" came a voice from the hallway. "Mr. Bradley would like to speak with you. He's waiting downstairs." Sam pulled on his boots and hat, checking his Colt .45 out of habit before heading down to the saloon's main room. Bradley was there, along with 2 other men Sam didn't recognize. The merchant looked anxious, his fingers drumming against the table where they sat nursing cups of coffee that had grown cold while they waited. "Glad you could join us," Bradley said, though his tone suggested he'd been waiting longer than he'd hoped. "These are my partners in the supply operation, Jake Morrison and Pete Culligan. We need to know if you're taking the job." Morrison was a heavy-set man with permanent squint lines around his eyes, the kind that came from years of staring into the sun while driving wagons across open country. Culligan was younger, maybe 30, with the quick, nervous energy of someone who'd seen too much violence in his short life. "Had some trouble last night," Morrison said without preamble. "Apache hit the Martinez ranch about 15 miles south of here. Killed 2 hands and ran off with a dozen head of cattle." Sam's blood turned to ice water. "Anyone else hurt?" "Martinez's daughter was there when it happened," Culligan added, his voice tight with anger. Well, let's just say she ain't talking to anyone right now. Doc Harrison and that Apache woman of his are with her." The words hit Sam like a physical blow. He'd seen what Apache warriors could do to captives, especially women, and the knowledge that it was still happening made his guilt burn hotter. How many raids had his actions 3 years ago prevented? How many innocent people had died because he'd chosen revenge over justice? "This changes things," Bradley said, leaning forward. "The supply run is more important than ever now. If we can't get those medical supplies and winter goods up from Tucson, people are going to suffer. Will you take the job?" Sam stared into his coffee, seeing his reflection wavering in the dark liquid. Every instinct told him to refuse, to saddle up and ride away from this place and its painful reminders. But the faces of the townspeople haunted him, ordinary folks trying to scratch out a living in an unforgiving land, people who didn't deserve to suffer because of his cowardice. "I'll do it," he said finally. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow morning, first light," Morrison replied, obvious relief in his voice. "We'll have 4 wagons and 6 drivers. You'll scout ahead and watch for trouble." After the men left to make preparations, Sam found himself walking the dusty streets of Esperanza, trying to clear his head. The town was already buzzing with news of the raid, and he could see the fear in people's faces. Children stayed close to their mothers. Men checked their weapons more frequently, and conversations were conducted in hushed, worried tones. He was passing the doctor's house when he heard voices from the open window. Doc Harrison was speaking in soothing, professional tones, but it was Anna's voice that stopped Sam in his tracks. "She will heal," Anna was saying, her English careful but confident. "The body mends itself when given time and proper care. But the spirit, that requires different medicine." "Your people have ways of dealing with such trauma," the doctor replied. "Ways that my medical training never taught me." "All people have such ways," Anna corrected gently. "The whites have simply forgotten them. They think healing comes only from bottles and bandages, but true healing requires understanding the connection between body, mind, and spirit." Sam found himself leaning against the adobe wall, drawn by the wisdom in her words. He thought of his own wounds, not the physical scars from years of hard living, but the deeper injuries that no doctor could treat. In my tribe, Anna continued, we believe that trauma creates a break in the spirit, like a bone that has been poorly set. Until that break is properly mended, the person cannot be whole again. And how does one mend such a break? Harrison asked. By facing the truth of what happened, accepting it, and then choosing to live beyond it. But it cannot be done alone. The community must help carry the burden until the spirit is strong enough to bear it again. Sam closed his eyes, feeling those words resonate in his chest like a bell. He had been carrying his burden alone for 3 years, never allowing anyone close enough to share the weight. Perhaps that was why the guilt never lessened, why the nightmares never faded. The sound of footsteps on the wooden porch made him step away from the window, not wanting to be caught eavesdropping. A moment later, Anna emerged from the house, carrying a small leather bag that probably contained herbs and other medical supplies. She saw him immediately, those dark eyes taking in his haggard appearance, with the same clinical assessment she'd probably just given the injured woman inside. You did not sleep well, she observed, her tone matter-of-fact rather than sympathetic. Haven't slept well in years, Sam admitted, surprised by his own honesty. Anna studied him for a moment, then nodded toward a small bench beneath a cottonwood tree. Sit. The morning sun is good for the spirit. Sam hesitated, then followed her suggestion. The bench was positioned to catch the early light, while remaining shaded by the tree's broad leaves. Anna sat beside him, close enough that he could smell the sage and cedar in her hair. You are the man who will guard the supply wagons, she said. It wasn't a question. Word travels fast in a small town. Mr. Bradley is not good at keeping secrets, and he is very relieved to have found someone willing to take the job. Anna pulled a small pouch from her bag and began rolling what looked like medicinal herbs into a cloth. He says you have experience with my people. The words hung in the air between them, like smoke from a signal fire. Sam felt his chest tighten, wondering how much he might know or suspect. Some, he said carefully. Good experience or bad? The question was asked so simply, so directly, that Sam found himself answering before he could think better of it. Bad. Very bad. Anna nodded, as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. The Apache have a saying. A man's past is written in his eyes for those who know how to read. Your eyes speak of great sorrow and greater guilt. Sam turned to look at her, expecting to see judgment or accusation in her face. Instead, he found only calm acceptance, as if she'd diagnosed a familiar illness and was considering the best treatment. What else do my eyes tell you? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. That you were not always the man you are now. That something happened to change you, to break your spirit in the way I spoke of to Dr. Harrison, and that you have been trying to heal that break alone, which is why it still pains you. The accuracy of her assessment took Sam's breath away. He wanted to deny it, to deflect with anger or sarcasm, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he found himself asking a question that had haunted him for 3 years. What if the break can't be healed? What if some things are too terrible to be forgiven? Anna finished rolling her herbs and tucked the small bundle back into her bag. When she looked at him again, her eyes held depths he hadn't noticed before, ancient wisdom that seemed far older than her years. In Apache tradition, we believe that every action creates ripples, like stones thrown into still water. Some ripples cause harm, spreading outward until they touch many lives. But other ripples can heal, can bring life where there was only death. She stood, adjusting the strap of her bag across her shoulder. The choice of which ripples to create belongs to each person, in each moment. She started to walk away, then paused and looked back at him. Tomorrow, when you ride with the wagons, you will have the chance to create new ripples. Choose carefully. Sam watched her go, his mind churning with emotions he'd thought dead and buried. For the first time in 3 years, he wondered if Anna might be right, if redemption was possible even for a man with blood on his hands. But first, he would have to survive tomorrow's journey. And something in the way the morning wind carried the scent of smoke and distant drums told him that survival was far from certain. The supply wagon train left Esperanza in the pale gray light of dawn, for heavy wagons loaded with medical supplies, winter clothing, and precious ammunition. Sam rode ahead on his horse, scanning the horizon for signs of trouble, while the drivers urged their teams forward through the desert scrub. The October air was crisp, promising another scorching day once the sun climbed higher. Jake Morrison drove the lead wagon, his experienced hands steady on the reins despite the nervous energy radiating from his broad frame. Behind him, 3 other drivers, men Sam had barely met, but who seemed competent enough, kept their weapons close and their eyes moving. Everyone knew this was dangerous territory, especially after yesterday's raid on the Martinez ranch. Sam's thoughts kept drifting to his conversation with Anna, her words about creating new ripples echoing in his mind like a prayer he'd forgotten how to say. He'd spent 3 years believing that his debt could never be repaid, that the blood on his hands had stained him permanently. But what if she was right? What if redemption was possible, even for someone like him? The train had been on the trail for 3 hours when Sam spotted the dust cloud. It was small at first, barely visible against the pale blue sky, but growing steadily larger as it approached from the northeast. Sam raised his hand, signaling the wagons to halt, then urged his horse up a small rise to get a better view. What he saw made his blood run cold. A lone rider was approaching at full gallop, hunched low over his horse's neck in the universal posture of someone fleeing for his life. Behind him, perhaps a mile back, came a larger group, at least a dozen riders spread out in a hunting formation that Sam recognized all too well. Apache warriors. Sam wheeled his horse around and rode hard back to the wagon train, his mind already calculating distances and defensive positions. The nearest cover was a cluster of red rocks about a quarter-mile to the south. Not ideal, but better than being caught in the open. "Apache!" he shouted as he reached the wagons. "Coming fast from the northeast. We need to reach those rocks." Morrison didn't waste time asking questions. He cracked his whip over his team's heads, and the other drivers followed suit. The heavily loaded wagons lurched into motion, wheels bouncing over rocks and desert hardpan as they raced toward the dubious safety of the rock formation. The fleeing rider reached them first, his horse lathered with sweat and foam. Sam was shocked to recognize Pete Culligan, one of Bradley's partners, who was supposed to be back in Esperanza. They hit the town. Culligan gasped, his face pale with terror and exhaustion. "Came in just after dawn, maybe 20 of them. They're burning everything." Sam's heart clenched like a fist. "How many dead?" "Don't know. I got out when I saw them coming. Rode hard to warn you." Culligan's voice broke. "They got the doctor's house first. I think Anna was inside." The words hit Sam like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs. Anna, the woman who had shown him that redemption might be possible, who had spoken of healing broken spirits and creating new ripples. The thought of her lying dead, or worse, in the burning ruins of Esperanza made something savage awaken in his chest. The wagons reached the rocks, just as the Apache war party crested the rise behind them. Sam counted 15 warriors, their faces painted for battle, riding hard with the fluid grace of men born to the saddle. They were still several hundred yards away, but closing fast. "Get the wagons in a circle," Sam shouted, dismounting and grabbing his rifle from its saddle scabbard. "Use them for cover." The drivers worked with desperate efficiency, positioning their wagons to create a makeshift fortress among the red rocks. It wasn't much. The gaps between wagons were too large, and the rocks provided only partial concealment, but it was better than being caught in the open. As the men checked their weapons and counted ammunition, Sam found himself studying the approaching warriors with a professional eye. They rode with discipline and purpose, not the wild charge of young men seeking glory. These were experienced fighters, and they knew their business. The war party slowed as they approached, spreading out to surround the rocks. Sam could see them clearly now, lean, hard men with the weathered faces of desert predators. Their leader, a warrior with distinctive white paint across his cheekbones, raised his hand and called something in Apache. "What's he saying?" Morrison whispered, his knuckles white where they gripped his rifle. Sam's throat felt like it was lined with sand. He understood more Apache than he'd ever admitted to anyone, words learned during happier times, when he'd thought all Indians were noble savages waiting to be civilized. Before he learned that they were just people, capable of both great kindness and terrible cruelty, exactly like everyone else. He's asking if we have medicine, Sam said finally. Someone in their band is badly hurt. Medicine, Culligan spat. After what they did to Esperanza, tell them to go to hell. But Sam was thinking of Anna's words about ripples, about the choices that created healing instead of harm. He stood up slowly, keeping his rifle lowered but ready, and called out in halting Apache. The effect was immediate. Several of the warriors shifted in their saddles, and their leader's eyes narrowed with surprise and something that might have been recognition. The painted warrior dismounted and walked forward, stopping just outside rifle range. "You speak the tongue of the people," he said in accented English. "Where did you learn our words?" Sam's mouth went dry. There was something familiar about this warrior, something that tickled at the edges of memory. "I knew some of your people years ago." Before what, white man? The question hung in the desert air like a challenge. Sam felt the weight of 3 years' worth of nightmares pressing down on him, the accumulated guilt of innocent blood spilled in anger and ignorance. But he also heard Anna's voice, speaking of broken spirits and the need for truth and healing. "Before I helped kill them," Sam said, his voice carrying across the distance between them. "Before I burned your village and murdered your children." The admission fell like a stone into still water, creating exactly the kind of ripples Anna had described. Several of the warriors raised their weapons, their faces twisting with rage. But their leader held up a hand, his painted features unreadable. "What village?" he asked quietly. Sam closed his eyes, remembering flames and screaming and the weight of a child's body in his arms. Crying Wolf's band. 3 winters ago, on the night of the harvest moon. The silence that followed was so complete that Sam could hear his own heartbeat. When he opened his eyes, the Apache leader was staring at him with an expression of such pure hatred that it should have burned him where he stood. "I am Standing Bear," the warrior said, each word precise and sharp as a knife blade. "Crying Wolf was my father. The children you killed were my sisters and brothers." Sam felt the world tilt around him, understanding flooding through him like ice water. This was why Anna had seemed familiar, why her face had haunted him even before they'd spoken. She had her father's eyes, the same intelligent gaze that had looked at Sam with trust and friendship right up until the moment the soldiers had opened fire. "Anna," Sam whispered, the name torn from his throat like a prayer. "Crying Wolf's daughter. Is she?" "My sister lives," Standing Bear said, his voice deadly quiet, "though the whites tried to burn her with the rest of us. She escaped that night, followed your army for days to see where you went. She has been watching for you ever since, waiting for the spirits to bring you back, so she could have her revenge." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Anna's presence in Esperanza, her acceptance by the white community, her careful questions about his past. It had all been planned. She had been hunting him for 3 years, just as he had been running from what he'd done. "She was there," Sam said, understanding flooding through him. "In the doctor's house, when your people attacked. She knew you were coming." Standing Bear's smile was cold as winter wind. "My sister sent word 2 days ago. She said the man who killed our family had finally come home, and that justice could at last be served. The attack on your town was meant to drive you here, to this place, where you could face the consequences of your actions." Sam looked around at the men crouched behind the wagons, good people who had trusted him to keep them safe. Now they were going to die because of his past, because he had been too cowardly to face the truth 3 years ago. "Let them go," he said, stepping out from behind the wagon that had been sheltering him. "Your quarrel is with me, not them." "No," Morrison called out. "Sam, get back here." But Sam was already walking forward, his rifle held loosely at his side. He could feel the weight of 15 pairs of eyes watching him, measuring him, deciding whether he would die quickly or slowly. "I won't fight you," he said to Standing Bear. "I've got no right to defend myself against what's coming. But these men don't deserve to suffer for what I did. Let them take their wagons and go." Standing Bear studied him for a long moment, and Sam saw something shift in the warrior's painted features. Not forgiveness. That would be too much to hope for. but perhaps a grudging respect for a man willing to face his fate without hiding behind others. "You will come with us," Standing Bear said finally. "Back to where our father died, where our family was murdered. There you will answer for your crimes in the way of our people." Sam nodded, knowing that he was probably agreeing to a death more terrible than anything he could imagine. But for the first time in 3 years, he felt something that might have been peace. The running was over. The debt would finally be paid. "Let me tell my men," he said. Standing Bear gestured with his rifle, and Sam walked back to the wagons on unsteady legs. Morrison grabbed his arm as he approached, his face tight with desperation. "We can fight them," the wagon master said. "We've got good positions here, plenty of ammunition." "No," Sam said quietly. "This ends here, Jake. Take the wagons back to Esperanza. Help whoever's left rebuild." He handed over his rifle and gun belt, then walked back toward Standing Bear. The Apache warrior was already mounted, and one of his men brought forward a horse for Sam. As he swung into the saddle, Sam looked back at the supply train one last time. The men were watching him with expressions ranging from confusion to grudging admiration. They didn't understand what was happening, but they could see that he was sacrificing himself for their safety. It was, Sam reflected, the first purely good thing he'd done in 3 years. As the war party rode away from the rocks, heading north toward the scene of an old massacre, Sam found himself thinking about Anna's words one more time. She had spoken of creating ripples that could heal, of choosing carefully in each moment. Perhaps his final choice would create the right kind of ripples at last. He just hoped he would live long enough to find out. The ride to the ruins of Crying Wolf's village took the better part of the day, winding through canyons and across mesas that Sam remembered with painful clarity. Every landmark brought back memories of that terrible night 3 years ago. The valley where his cavalry unit had made camp, the ridge where they'd first spotted the Apache cook fires, the narrow pass where Lieutenant Morrison had given the order that would haunt Sam for the rest of his life. "No prisoners," Morrison had said, his young face hard with the certainty that only inexperienced officers possessed. "These savages killed the Henderson family last month. Tonight we make them pay." Sam had tried to argue, had pointed out that this was a peaceful band known for trading with white settlers rather than raiding them. But he was only a sergeant, and Morrison was the officer. When the attack began, Sam had followed orders like the good soldier he'd been trained to be. Now, as Standing Bear led the war party through the same landscape, Sam wondered if Anna was right about spirits and second chances. The universe seemed determined to make him confront every detail of his crime, to walk the same ground and breathe the same air as he had on that night of blood and fire. They reached the village site just as the sun was beginning to set, painting the desert in shades of red and gold that reminded Sam uncomfortably of flames. The Apache had rebuilt nothing. The burned remains of wickiups stood like broken teeth against the darkening sky, and weeds had grown up through the ashes of what had once been a thriving community. In the center of the ruins, someone had constructed a small circle of stones. As they drew closer, Sam could see that bones had been arranged within the circle, human bones, including several small skulls, that made his stomach clench with recognition and guilt. 43 people died here, Standing Bear said, dismounting near the stone circle. Men, women, children, elders, all killed by white soldiers who claimed they were protecting innocent settlers. Sam climbed down from his horse on unsteady legs, his eyes fixed on those small skulls. He remembered now twins, perhaps 6 years old, who had run from a burning wickiup directly into the line of fire. He had been the one to cut them down, following Morrison's orders even as his soul screamed in protest. "I remember them," he whispered. "Their names were Little Fox and Dancing Bird," Standing Bear said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "They were my youngest sisters. They loved to race their ponies and play with the camp dogs. Dancing Bird could sing like a meadowlark." The details hit Sam like physical blows, making the children real in a way that his guilt-hazed memories had never allowed. They weren't just faceless victims anymore. They were individuals with names and personalities, dreams cut short by his bullets. "I'm sorry," Sam said, the words feeling pathetically inadequate. "I know that doesn't mean anything, but I'm sorry." Sorry. Standing Bear's laugh was bitter as alkali water. You burn our home, murder our family, then ride away and expect sorry to wash the blood from your hands? One of the other warriors, a young man with fresh paint and eager eyes, stepped forward with his knife drawn. Let me kill him now, Standing Bear. Let me send his spirit to beg forgiveness from our ancestors. But Standing Bear held up a restraining hand, his gaze never leaving Sam's face. Not yet, Ghost Walker. First he must understand the full price of what he has done. As if summoned by those words, another figure emerged from the gathering darkness. Sam's breath caught in his throat as he recognized Anna, though she bore little resemblance to the gentle healer he had known in Esperanza. Gone was the white woman's dress and careful English. She wore traditional Apache clothing and moved with the fluid grace of someone completely at home in the wilderness. Sister, Standing Bear said, embracing her briefly. You were right. He came, just as you said he would. Anna's dark eyes found Sam's across the circle of bones, and he saw no warmth in them now, only the cold fire of 3 years' worth of carefully nursed hatred. Samuel McKenna, she said, her voice carrying clearly in the desert stillness. The man who murdered my father while he slept. The soldier who burned our sacred places and scattered the ashes of our ancestors to the wind. Sam wanted to defend himself, to explain that he had been following orders, that he'd had no choice. But the words died in his throat as he looked around at the ruins and remembered the truth of that night. There had been a choice. There was always a choice. He had simply been too much of a coward to make the right one. You've been planning this for 3 years, he said instead. Anna nodded slowly. I followed your army for days after the massacre, learning the names and faces of every man who participated. Most of them are dead now, killed in other battles, claimed by disease, or simply lost to the passage of time. But not you, Samuel McKenna. You survived, and that gave me purpose. She walked slowly around the circle of bones, her movements ritual and deliberate. I learned your language, your customs, your ways of thinking. I made myself useful to white communities, always listening, always watching for word of a man who matched your description. When I heard that a lone cowboy with haunted eyes had come to Esperanza, I knew my long hunt was finally over. Sam watched her pace, understanding now how completely he had been manipulated. Every conversation, every moment of seeming connection between them had been calculated, designed to keep him in place until this moment of reckoning could arrive. The attack on Esperanza, he said. How many died? None, Anna replied, surprising him. We took what we needed and burned some buildings to create the proper amount of fear, but no one was killed. I am not my father's daughter for nothing. He taught me that unnecessary violence weakens the spirit of the warrior. Standing Bear looked at his sister with something that might have been disappointment. You have grown soft in your years among the whites, Anna. This man deserves no mercy. Mercy? Anna's laugh was sharp as broken glass. Who spoke of mercy? I said no one died in Esperanza. Not that this man would escape justice. There are worse things than death, brother. She stopped directly in front of Sam, close enough that he could see the pain that lived behind her anger. For just a moment, her careful composure cracked, and he glimpsed the frightened young woman who had watched her family burn 3 years ago. Do you know what it feels like? She asked quietly. To lose everything in a single night? To watch your father die with your name on his lips, calling for a daughter who was too far away to help him? Sam's throat felt raw. No, I don't. Then you will learn. Anna turned to address the circle of warriors who had gathered around them. In the old days, when someone committed a crime against the tribe, they were given a choice. They could die quickly and cleanly, or they could live with the consequences of their actions, stripped of everything they valued, forced to walk the world knowing that their choices had destroyed innocent lives. You want me to live? Sam asked, confused. I want you to suffer, Anna corrected. Death would be too easy, too quick. You would simply cease to exist, and the debt would remain unpaid. But if you live, if you carry the weight of what you have done for the rest of your days, that is true justice. Standing Bear frowned. Sister, I do not understand. This man killed our family. Honor demands blood for blood. Anna knelt beside the circle of bones, her fingers tracing the skull of one of the children. Our father always said that revenge was a luxury the Apache could not afford. We are too few, and our enemies too many. True strength comes from surviving, from ensuring that our people continue even when individuals must be sacrificed. She stood and faced Sam again, her expression implacable. You will live, Samuel McKenna, but you will live knowing that every breath you take is a debt owed to the dead. You will spend the rest of your days trying to balance the scales, helping others in a futile attempt to make amends for what cannot be undone. And if I refuse? Sam asked, though he already knew his answer. Then my brother will kill you here and now, and your death will mean nothing. Your choice, die uselessly, or live with purpose. Either way, you will never know peace again. Sam looked around the circle at the assembled warriors, seeing his own death reflected in their eyes. They wanted blood, wanted the satisfaction of ending the man who had brought such sorrow to their people. But Anna offered something different, not forgiveness, but the possibility of meaning in his suffering. What would you have me do? He asked. Anna smiled, but there was no warmth in it. First, you will help me gather the bones of our family. We will build a proper funeral pyre and send their spirits to the place where the Apache go after death. You will help me perform this sacred duty with your own hands, feeling the weight of each bone, remembering each life you helped destroy. The task took hours. Working by firelight, Sam and Anna carefully collected the scattered remains, sorting bones by size and age, while the warriors watched in silence. Every skull felt impossibly heavy in Sam's hands, every small rib bone a separate accusation. By the time they had finished arranging the bones on a platform of dried wood, Sam's face was streaked with tears he didn't remember shedding. Now we burn them, Anna said, handing him a burning branch. Send their spirits to peace at last. Sam's hand shook as he lowered the flame to the kindling. The wood caught quickly, sending sparks dancing up toward the star-filled sky. As the fire grew, consuming the last physical remnants of crying wolf's people, Sam felt something break inside his chest. Not his spirit, which had been shattered long ago, but the wall of denial and self-pity he had built around his guilt. For the first time in 3 years, he truly understood what he had done, not as a soldier following orders, not as a man caught up in the madness of war, but as a human being who had chosen to kill innocent people because it was easier than refusing to obey. I will carry this debt, he said as the flames reached their peak. I will spend whatever years I have left trying to make amends. Anna nodded, satisfied. Then we understand each other at last. As the fire burned down to embers, the warriors began to drift away into the darkness. Soon only Sam, Anna, and Standing Bear remained beside the dying flames. What happens now? Sam asked. Now you return to Esperanza, Anna replied. You will help rebuild what was burned, care for any who were injured, and make yourself useful to people who have no reason to trust you. You will do this knowing that I will be watching, that I will know if you fail to honor your promise. And you? Anna looked at the last glowing coals, her face thoughtful. I will return to my work as a healer. There is always someone who needs help, someone whose spirit has been broken by loss or trauma. Perhaps in helping them heal, I can find some peace for myself. Standing Bear stepped forward, his painted face grim in the firelight. I do not like this, sister. This man deserves death. Death comes to all men in time, brother. But first, he must earn the right to die with honor. Anna placed a gentle hand on Standing Bear's arm. Trust me in this. I have waited 3 years for justice. Let me decide what form that justice should take. The warrior looked between his sister and Sam, clearly struggling with conflicting loyalties. Finally, he nodded reluctantly. So be it. But know this, white man. If you fail to honor your debt, if you run again or forget your promise, I will find you. And when I do, your death will not be quick. Sam met the warrior's gaze steadily. I understand. As the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, Anna walked Sam to where his horse waited. The animal seemed nervous, sensing the lingering tension in the air. There is something else you should know, Anna said as Sam mounted up. The supply wagons made it safely back to Esperanza. Your sacrifice ensured that people will have what they need to survive the winter. That's something, I suppose, Sam said, though the words felt hollow. It is a beginning, Anna corrected. The first stone cast into still water, creating ripples that may touch many lives. Whether those ripples heal or harm depends on what you do next. Sam gathered his reins, looking down at the woman who had orchestrated his downfall and, perhaps, his redemption. Will I see you again? Every day, Anna replied. In the faces of people you help, in the lives you save, in the small acts of kindness that cost you nothing, but mean everything to those who receive them. You will see me in every choice you make to create healing instead of harm. As Sam rode away from the ruins of Crying Wolf's village, the sun rose behind him, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. For the first time in 3 years, he was not running from his past, but toward an uncertain future. The debt he carried would never be fully paid. Anna had made that clear. But perhaps, in trying to pay it, he might finally become the man he should have been all along. Behind him, smoke from the funeral pyre rose straight up in the still morning air, carrying the spirits of the dead toward whatever peace awaited them. Sam did not look back. He had work to do, a life to rebuild, and a debt to honor. The ripples of his new choices were already spreading outward, and only time would tell where they might lead. In the distance, the town of Esperanza waited, wounded but not broken, its people ready to begin the long work of healing. Sam McKenna rode toward them carrying the weight of the dead, but also, for the first time in years, the possibility of redemption. It would have to be enough. If you like this story, leave your opinion in the comments and, of course, leave a like and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Big hug and see you soon.